Okay, let's dive into this. We all want to know what actually helps young children learn, right? It's a huge question, a really high stakes one. We're talking billions of dollars, and even more importantly, we're talking about kids' futures. So, how do we figure out which new program is a real game changer and which one just sounds good on paper?
I mean, really think about it. If you're a parent and you're trying to pick a preschool, or you're an educator thinking about a new curriculum, you want proof. You want to know it's going to work. And for that, we all rely on scientific studies to give us the answer.
And the stakes here? They could not be higher. We have these landmark studies. You might have heard of the Perry Preschool Project, for example. They've shown that top-notch early education can literally change a child's entire life. We're talking higher earnings, better health, even lower crime rates decades down the line. So, yeah, getting the research right is absolutely critical.
But here's the thing. To find out what works, we have to lean on those scientific studies. And it turns out, a whole lot of them have this hidden, really critical flaw.
This quote from a 2019 review just hits the nail on the head. A large majority of studies were underpowered. Now, what does that mean? Well, in plain English, it means they were designed from the start in a way that made it almost impossible to find a positive result, even if the program they were testing was actually working. So, let's break that down. What is an underpowered study? Okay, imagine you're in a giant, noisy, crowded room, and you're trying to hear someone whisper from across the way. That whisper? That's the effect of the new program. And all that crowd noise? That's just all the random variation in the data. An underpowered study is like trying to hear that whisper with only one or two people listening. Your chances of actually catching it are basically zero.
And this right here shows you the real-world consequences. On the one hand, with an underpowered study, you have a huge risk of what's called a false negative. You conclude the program doesn't work, but not because it's bad. It's because your study wasn't sensitive enough to even see the effect. And the result? A great idea gets tossed in the trash. But on the other hand, a well-powered study, that gives you confidence. If it finds something, you can actually trust the result.
So the big question is, how do we fix this, right? How do we design studies that are actually strong enough to hear that whisper? Well, let's look at the solution and see how researchers can draw up a solid blueprint before they even start collecting data. The hero of our story is a tool called an a priori power analysis. It sounds fancy, but the idea is actually super simple and powerful. It's just doing the math before you start your experiment to figure out exactly how many people you need in your study to have a fair shot at finding the effect you're looking for. You know, it's like checking the weather before you plan the big outdoor picnic. The whole process is kind of like following a recipe. First, you set your goal. What's the smallest effect that would still be a big deal? Second, you gather your ingredients. These are key statistical numbers called design parameters. And third, you put it all together to calculate your sample size. Simple as that. But here's the catch. And it's a big one. For decades, researchers in early childhood ed have been trying to follow this recipe, but a huge chunk of the cookbook was just missing. Those reliable ingredients, those super important design parameters for this specific age group, they just didn't exist.
And that brings us to this absolutely groundbreaking paper that's coming out in 2025. This study, well, it is the missing recipe book. It's exactly what researchers have been needing for years.
So what these researchers did was just brilliant. They took 4 massive German studies, we're talking data from thousands and thousands of kids, and they put it all together. And what came out the other side is the first ever comprehensive recipe book of design parameters for planning studies on everything from cognitive skills to social development and for all different kinds of measurements. Now, one of the key ingredients here has a fancy name, intra-class correlation, or ICC. But don't let the name scare you. The idea is actually really intuitive. Just think of it as a similarity score. It just tells you how much more similar kids in the same daycare center are to each other than they are to kids in a totally different center. That's it. And this is where it gets really, really fascinating. Look at how that clustering number, that similarity score, changes. When you measure cognitive skills with a test, the clustering is around 0.12. But check this out. For socio-emotional skills,
When parents report on it, the score is super low, just 0.03. But when educators at the center report on those same skills, the score jumps way up to 0.09. So who is doing the measuring matters a lot. In fact, get this. For some cognitive skills that are measured by educators, the researchers found that this clustering number, the ICC, can shoot all the way up to 0.24. Now, that might not sound like a big number, but in this world, that is huge. It means that almost a quarter of the differences in those skills can be explained just by which daycare a kid goes to. And that has massive implications for how you have to design a study.
So, okay, we have all these numbers, 0.12, 0.24, but why does any of this really matter? How does having this shiny new recipe book actually change things in the real world for researchers and, for kids?
Let's make this super concrete. Let's ask a practical question. Imagine you've got a great new program, and you want your study to be strong enough to see a medium-sized effect, something that would be considered pretty meaningful. How many kids do you actually need in your study? Well, prepare yourself, because the paper runs the numbers, and the difference is staggering. If you could run a perfect study in a lab, where you assign kids one by one, you'd need about 1,400 of them. But if you do a study in the real world, where you have to enroll entire daycare centers because of that clustering effect we just talked about, you would need more than 5,500 children to have the exact same level of confidence in your results. That's almost 4 times as many kids. And that is why this matters so much. If you didn't know these numbers beforehand, you might run that big field study with only 1,400 kids. You'd find nothing. You'd say, well, I guess the program's a bust, and you'd walk away. But you'd be wrong. Getting the design right isn't just about saving millions of dollars. It's about making sure we don't accidentally throw away a discovery that could have helped millions of children. The authors of the paper themselves put it best. They've given researchers a rich source of design parameters, all the essential ingredients needed to do these power analyses. They've handed the entire field a brand new toolkit to build better, stronger, and way more efficient studies. So let's just boil this all down. What should you take away from all this? First, not all studies are the same. A whole bunch of them are underpowered. Second, the solution is a power analysis. That's the crucial blueprint you need for a good study. Third, this amazing new research finally gives scientists the ingredients they need for that blueprint. And it all leads to one thing. Better design means we get more trustworthy answers for our kids. And that leaves me with one final thought. We've just given you a new, really powerful question to have in your back pocket. So the next time you see a headline or hear someone say, a new study shows that something worked, or maybe that it didn't, I hope a little voice in your head speaks up and asks, yeah, but was the study powerful enough to really know for sure?